started hanging out at the Disability Resource Center when it was still J. Henry Meyer Undergraduate Library and is now open green space. I got pretty accustomed to hanging out at the office in Meyer. So I was sort of by default part of the cluster of students with disabilities who were interested in university policy and interested in raising disability awareness and being sort of conduits from the disability community to the outside world, because that's my thing.
We actually did accomplish getting a disability reading room where we could have disability related texts and culture all represented. There was like this extra space in like the Wilbur cluster of dorms, and they dedicated a room to the disability reading room. And a lot of it was around the advocacy that the students, and I think that it's needed in being part of like the American Indian community. You know, there was definitely a center I could go to. I needed that space for connection and yearned for it. And that would have been a real haven for me. It's not the classroom and it's not home. It's that third space. And I knew what that experience felt like in being part of other centers. And that would have been really helpful for me, I think.
Another fortuitous thing that happened in regard to the construction of our building and the accessibility features was that Joan and I got to work extensively with the architect. So a lot of the accessibility features in our building, particularly on the first floor, were built in. The only things we've really had to do since original construction is add power doors in a couple of places. Also factored in a large student space that was there at the opening of the building, but we were in a lull period of student activism and nobody used it. We were doing all of our Braille just about in-house by then, and we needed space for workers and embossing equipment. So that got taken over. It moved into the student space 2006 or 2007, maybe. The students lost their designated space. The office gained production space. We had production space in Meyer Library on the second and third floor. Meyer took their space back. It's very political.
I was also creating that student organization, Power to Act Abilities Coming Together, which is like a student organization for students with hidden and visible disabilities, because I knew we needed a community space for this, knew that we like needed connection. I'm struggling. It probably means other people are struggling. We can help each other.
So that's what the Abilities Hub. And basically that was something that we had started. The idea was to have a temporary space, use it as an opportunity to provide data on usage and put a budget. That was sort of the strategy. Starting with this temporary space, it's not something we can use full time. It means that we have to schedule it, which has its own issues and logistics associated with it. But it was better than having nothing, just having anything and having a name to it, getting people to recognize it, people seeing that there's space, having that publicity, getting the daily involved. All of those things are important to give voice and to get people to start seeing it, because if you get momentum going, then it's better than having nothing.
The disability community had been advocating for a community center of our own, like many other identity communities that had them, arguably since the 80s. Is one of the first evidence we found. And we thought the population of students with disabilities was much bigger on campus at that point. And this is, there's obviously a movement around student mental health on campus nowadays. And, mental health is a disability issue. So we sort of saw all of these things coming together as a really good time to sort of ramp up public pressure. And so we launched Disability Equity Now, and we had rallies, and including one where called Stanford an ableist university, and said administrators weren't doing enough to people who had shown up. And we got to the place where finally, sort of a community center process was designed. But we didn't want to lose momentum while that was happening, because it was taking months and months and months, and the deadlines kept being pushed back. The only way they were going to think that we were the ones they should prioritize if they saw student support. That wasn't just students with disabilities. And we finally got to sort of the end, and I decided to run for ASSU exec with my friend. We unfortunately lost, but we did get to the point where both of the winning slates had a disability community center, disability studies as an academic program, and increased support for students with disabilities in both platforms of the two winning candidates. It kind of felt like our push on campus for a community center and really to be recognized as a community, was really gaining traction.
There had been a previous push to make the Abilities Hub, which was a sort of community space in the second floor of I think it's called the Student Services Building. It was a problem because that second floor is only accessible through the front doors and they would lock at night. It's farther away from the rest of like student activities, and it wasn't necessarily accessible. It was a conference room, so we were sharing it with Beam, which meant that we couldn't leave things in there. So it really wasn't like a space we could use. And I was like, well, this is ridiculous because there are rooms on the second floor of Old Union, which is the student like hub, and they're just empty. Why don't we just take over one of these and turn it into our center? While I was sort of running this guerrilla interim disability community center, which started in February of 2020. At the same time, we were trying to get into the application cycle for the Student Resources Committee to be able to request finances to build a community center, essentially. There were a bunch of us who did this presentation to the committee. I kept saying, like, I understand it's not a great time, but like, you said you would respond to this and you didn't. So push through that whole process. And then I was involved in the kind of implementation committee for that, and also helped to like pick the first program coordinator for it.
Students basically just guerrillaed a disability community space by booking a room in Old Union, I believe, just sort of in perpetuity, and made some decorations for it and things like that. So this became, the sort of ad hoc disability community space. And then COVID hit. Needless to say, we couldn't make those reservations anymore. Talk to the administrators of being like, hey, disabled students on campus are getting the short end of the stick in oh so many ways. And one of those ways, and an important one, is community, right? We're dispersed and spread out across campus. And so we don't have a centralized place to meet and find community and find joy and socialize. So it came down the pipes that the disability community space is going to happen. Importantly, it's a space, right? It's not a community center. We don't have the same level of funding. We don't have permanence, right? This is supposed to be a pilot program. I spent a decent bit of time getting feedback from students with disabilities, particularly in my role as, director of dis advocacy. There was no inter-community animosity, but definitely a diversity of opinions within the community.
So we call it disco for sure, but it's like dis as in disability, co as in community.